Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of the Compacts in Action webinar series hosted by the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. My name is Andrew Bates, and I will be your host this afternoon. On behalf of CSG and our panelists, I'm very glad that you're here to learn more about the Nurse Licensure Compact and the Physical Therapy Licensure Compact, directly from the administrators of these vital interstate agreements. Occupational licensure interstate compacts, like the NLC and PT Compact, are the most powerful tools available to states to facilitate interstate practice of licensed professions without sacrificing public protection. In fact, licensure compacts strengthen public protection by allowing for rapid exchange of licensure and disciplinary information through a shared interstate licensure data system, but more on that in just a moment. Before I introduce our first presenter, we have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Audience members are welcome to turn their cameras on or off as they're comfortable, but we ask everyone to kindly keep yourself muted at all times unless you're speaking. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. We will have ample time for questions at the end of the session, so please hold your questions for the end or post them in the chat so that we can address them later. Finally, this webinar is being recorded so as to eventually be posted on CSG's website. By remaining in the meeting, you are giving your implied consent to the recording. Now to introduce our first presenter. Jim Puente was appointed director of the Nurse Licensure Compact in 2009. This position at the National Council of State Boards of Nursing is dedicated to the goals of the Compact's governing body, the Nurse Licensure Compact Commission. Jim is charged with managing the day-to-day operations of the NLC, the development of strategies for regulatory compliance and implementation of the Compact strategic plan. With over 30 years of experience in healthcare, Jim holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Notre Dame, an MS degree in public service management from DePaul University, and a Master of Jurisprudence degree in health law and policy from Loyola University School of Law. Jim is also a certified association executive. Jim, good to see you, and thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm happy to be here. Let me just share my screen and we will get started. Can you just confirm that you can see my slides?
Looks good.
All right. All right, well, thank you. And always appreciate to present information about the Nurse Licensure Compact. And of course, we will take your questions at the end. Let me just, I want to make sure that I don't take more time than we have. I'm just setting my timer here. But you may be familiar with the Nurse Licensure Compact, or maybe this is new information for you, but the Compact is a vehicle for multi-state licensure and currently has 38 member states. The Compact is introduced in states as model legislation and enacted, and of course, following enactment, there is a period of implementation after which multi-state licenses can be issued. This particular compact pertains to RNs and LPNs. It does not pertain to advanced practice nurses. Advanced practice nurses will have their own compact, separate and distinct from this one. And we anticipate that one to be operational in the next couple of years as it ramps up to its threshold number of states. For the purposes of the NLC, when a nurse has a multi-state license, the nurse is able to practice in any compact state. That's of tremendous value to a nurse who needs to hold multiple licenses. Because with one multi-state license, the nurse can practice in a variety of jurisdictions. And that practice can be in-person or telephonic practice, what we call telehealth. And it's important to note that whenever a nurse is practicing in another jurisdiction, the nurse is subject to the nurse practice laws of that state, which is the state where the patient is located at the time that practice occurs. So here are some of the issues with the current system of one state, one license. It is old, it is antiquated, and very much not in line with the way that healthcare is delivered today. Much of our healthcare is done on an outpatient basis. There are far fewer days that people spend in hospital beds, and we have something called remote patient monitoring. We have a large population of people in the US with chronic healthcare conditions, and we can keep them well and out of the hospital by monitoring them on an outpatient basis. However, if we're going to do that, the caregivers or the providers need to be licensed in the states where their patients are located. And therein lies the problem that in a country with 50 states, many nurses tend to have dozens of licenses in order to carry out their work. And so that also means that you have to pay a fee for each license. You have to renew that license, which may have a different renewal period in each state. It can be costly, and as well as the requirements for renewal can vary from state to state. All of that is a tremendous burden to nurses. I should also add that the amount of time it takes to wait for a license to be issued is an issue itself, because when you're without a license, you may very well be without a job and therefore unemployed. So this is another key factor, in particular for military spouses when they are transitioned and stationed in another state. With any individual license, there are multiple fees, not just the fee for the application for licensure, but a fee for criminal background checks, and then a fee for license verification. All goes hand in hand with obtaining any individual license, which is why the prospects of having multiple licenses are very costly. And then the remaining issue is the availability of nurses. So if nurses are needed in a certain locale, in a certain geographic region, the nurse needs to, in order for the nurse to respond to go to that specific area, the nurse needs to have already been licensed there. So if you're not licensed, now you have to wait until you can get licensed to be able to assist in that area where you're needed. It could be a disaster, it could be a hurricane or something like that, a pandemic, or it could just be a hospital that has a shortage of nurses, that has a need today and can't wait a month or 2 months or more for a nurse to get licensed. All of this together, as we'll talk about later, is remedied by the multi-state license. Keep in mind that in order to obtain a multi-state license, a nurse needs to be a resident of a compact state. If a nurse applies to a compact state but is not a resident of that state, they would not be issued a multi-state license. So this works the same way that your driver's license does. Your driver's license is issued by the state that you live in. You can't get a driver's license in a state that you don't live in. And so residency is very key to the multi-state license. And I think the final point I want to make on this slide is that to obtain a multi-state license, a nurse needs to meet uniform license requirements. So these requirements are within the statute, within the NLC statute. That means that what it takes to get a multi-state license in one state is the same in the next state. So if we have nurses meeting the same requirements from state to state, why should they not be able to practice in other states? I think today, in states that are not in the compact, they might point out that our requirements or our standards are higher than in other states. But keep in mind, and if you have this slide and can click on this link, you can take a look at the 11 requirements. And let me just briefly tell you how those came about. Because when this compact was developed, all of the boards of nursing in the country came together in 2013 and 2014 to talk about what should the list of requirements look like in order for a nurse to be able to practice in any state within the compact. In other words, what does a nurse have to meet in order for me as another state to feel safe for a nurse from some other state to come and practice in my state? And that is what you have in the uniform licensure requirements, that uniform set. Many people may not be aware that nursing is the largest healthcare profession that is licensed, with over 5 million nurses. And hopefully someday, all 50 states will be in the compact, and we will have that wonderful mobility of nurses from state to state. Currently, with the 38 states that are in the compact, over 2 million nurses hold a multi-state license. That is of tremendous value to any state that has a shortage of nurses, to be able to access nurses from other states who can readily come to practice in their state with no delay. I'll talk about some of the benefits, and we've covered some of these already, such as access to care, but protecting the public. Inherent in the compact statute are different provisions related to protecting the public. First and foremost, the uniform licensure requirements, but among them, state and federal criminal background checks are required at the time that the multi-state license is issued during that application process. Keep in mind that we still have states today in the United States that don't require criminal background checks. Those states tend to be a magnet for nurses who have a criminal history, because they know that they can get a license there and not be discovered that they may have some criminal history in their past, and may in fact have some licenses that were revoked or suspended. We talked about the cost that is a big factor, not only to nurses, but to employers. But the redundancy or the decrease of redundant regulatory processes. Obviously, if a nurse doesn't have to get 20 or 30 licenses, but only one, that's a whole lot less of work that has to be done on the regulatory side. We talked about the availability of providers, because we said that with the multi-state license, a nurse can easily go to any other state to practice when needed, without a delay. And I think that's the key here, is that there's not a delay, because in order to practice in another state, there is not any hoops to jump through. There isn't any paperwork you have to fill out. There isn't any type of a notification. A nurse is readily able to practice in another state. And we talked about the decrease in time when relocating, and that could pertain to anyone, but I think I used the example of military spouses who, when their family relocates, oftentimes needs to get another license in a new state. Continuing with this, benefits the ability to practice across state lines lawfully. Today, much care is telephonic, meaning nurses are talking with patients by phone in many different states. And many nurses are doing that without being licensed in the state in which their patients are located, which is unlicensed practice. And that's why a multi-state license gives a nurse the authority to practice in every compact state. And hopefully when we become a compact nation of 50 states, a nurse will be able to practice telephonically at any state. This in itself is the streamlining of licensure and reducing the barriers to cross-border practice. If you truly want to reduce the barriers to cross-border practice, then a nurse should not have to take any steps in order to practice in another state. And that is what the multi-state license does. Patients often travel to another state in order to get care and then return back to their state, maybe either after discharge or to enter into a different level of care. The multi-state license allows for that continuity of care rather than for that handoff having to stop at the state line. You notice throughout the country, many hospitals are a part of the healthcare system now, multi-state healthcare systems, systems which have hospitals in 20 or 30 states. The NLC allows those large systems to deploy their nursing personnel throughout in different hospitals within their company without having to hire external nurses. And so that's another way of increasing access to care and shifting their personnel to the areas where it's needed most. And we talked earlier about renewal and the ability to have one multi-state license, and that is the one license that you renew. You can imagine if there was not such a thing as the driver's license compact, you would have to get a separate driver's license for every state that you wanted to drive in. It is due to there being a driver's license compact, which allows other states to accept the driver's license issued by your home state and vice versa. And that is exactly what we do with the Nurse Licensure Compact. These are the current states, 38 states that have enacted the compact. Only the gray states are not a compact state yet. However, each of these gray states has seen legislation to join the compact, and they will continue to see legislation in the next legislative session. We know from surveys, especially individual state surveys, that 92 to 98% of nurses in any given state wants their state to join the compact. The same type of statistic is true for hospitals wanting their state to join the compact. So we will see these states grow further from 38 into the 40s very shortly. And this year, we added Guam, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and we believe also that another 1 or 2 more states will join yet this year, but certainly next year as well. Closing the gap of states that are non-compact states. This year, by the way, saw more states than ever try to join the compact. There were 14 states that introduced legislation.
Hey, Jim, I would actually cut in real quick here because we have a question that might be best to address now. Someone asked, what exactly does partial implementation mean?
Absolutely. So when a state joins the compact, there needs to be an implementation process. And that usually takes 6 to 12 months. And that starts following the enactment. Well, something different happened in our recent history, which was the pandemic. So in New Jersey and Guam, although they enacted the compact, they typically would wait a year to implement it and then after a year, they'll be able to issue multi-state licenses and to allow nurses to come to those states who have a multi-state license already from another state. Due to the pandemic, they said, we have enacted the compact. Can we not open our doors to allow nurses to come in if they already have a multi-state license? And the answer to that is yes. So they've partially implemented the compact in that they allow nurses to work in on this map, these purple states, but they're not ready to issue multi-state licenses yet because they haven't completed implementation. And so all of these issues that we've talked about are in fact remedied with this powerful policy tool, which brings the state up to modern licensure standards with the multi-state model. Because the nurse with the multi-state license not only has met uniform licensure requirements, but they're in good standing because a nurse who is under discipline is not able to hold a multi-state license. The nurse has the ability to practice in all compact states without delay, which is what we said earlier. So they can commence practice in another state by virtue of having authority with the license that they currently hold. These are a number of the national organizations that support the Nurse Licensure Compact. And of course, there are many others at the state level that support the compact as well. And this is my contact information. You're welcome to email me with any questions you may have, but also to look at our information, both fact sheets and videos at nlc.gov. And one final point I would like to make is, which is an important one, is that when you're not a compact state, your state is less attractive to the new nurse graduates who are graduating with their degrees. If you talk to the graduates today, the new graduates, they want to locate in a compact state where they'll have the ability to get a multi-state license rather than a non-compact state. So joining the compact makes your state a more viable option to decrease your shortage that you may be experiencing with nurses. And it's a reason for the nurses in the nursing programs within your state to stay in your state rather than leaving after graduation to another state. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim, for that excellent introduction to the NLC. As a reminder, Jim will be staying with us for Q&A, so we'll have a chance to pick his brain towards the end of the session. Next, we have the privilege of hearing from TJ Cantwell, who's the administrator of the Physical Therapy Licensure Compact. TJ became the first compact administrator for the PT Compact Commission in July 2017. TJ works with PT Compact member states on the compact implementation process, manages day-to-day activities, advises state boards interested in joining the PT Compact, and communicates with the public regarding the operations and value of the PT Compact, as he's doing today. TJ has more than 20 years of national nonprofit and association management experience. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Government from the University of Virginia and a Master of Public Policy from American University. TJ, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks to CSG. Just to confirm, you can see my screen, hopefully. Great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for attending today. Jim did a great job in reviewing kind of the basics of compacts, which is fantastic. He always does a great job talking about compacts in general. So a lot of what he said are related to compacts and the history and how they operate apply to us as well. But we do operate a little bit different in terms of how we administer the compact, if you will. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and also reiterate some of the reasons why the compact works really well for physical therapy and covers both physical therapists and physical therapist assistants. So I'll discuss a brief history, do the overview of our structure, the benefits of the compact to everyone, really, some of the state requirements and key aspects related to the compact, and then talk to you a bit about kind of how we issue compact privileges to give you a better sense of the differences between some compacts out there in terms of how they actually implement compacts for their different professions. And then hopefully, again, we'll have some time at the end. You can ask any questions that you might have of me, and some may be the same to Jim, and some might be different. So ours, goal of our compact, the same as all the other compacts. We want to facilitate the interstate practice of physical therapy with the goal of really improving patient access, right? How can we improve mobility and portability? In our case, for the physical therapy, there was a lot of discussion that's happened really over more than a decade about what would be the right answer. Would it be reducing regulatory barriers? Would it be creating regional agreements, pacts, some kind of national licensure, or compact? And we looked at the nursing as a great example of what they had done for nursing in their compact over several years, and decided that was really the best model. It had a lot of benefits to it, which I'll discuss in a second. So our organizations, including the American Physical Therapy Association, the State Boards of Physical Therapy, Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, as well as other stakeholders in different member states, came together and had a discussion of what would that look like for us. They developed some draft model language. Just as Jim was saying, there's some for the nursing, there is some for physical therapy that must be passed the same way in each state that adopts it. It's the core of all compacts. So we created our own model language, again, similar to what nursing has, but a little bit different in how we implement it. And then the first 10 states came on board back in April of 2017. We had our first meeting that summer. And subsequently, we started issuing compact privileges in 2018. Since that time, we've had pretty rapid growth, as you can see on the screen. We're up to the 20, or actually 34 jurisdictions that are part of our compact now have enacted that same model legislation. 23 of those states are active. So as was mentioned before, not all those states have had the time to implement all the requirements yet. So they're in the implementation stage. They're not what we call live or fully active in the compact. They've got to get all those requirements in place that the compact sets out in order to be able to be ready to do that. But we're working closely with those jurisdictions to all be active as soon as possible. But the good news is 23 states that have joined the compact are actually actively issuing and accepting compact privileges right now, so that PTs and PTAs in those states can really work more freely between those states and still be governed underneath the existing structure for to make sure that they're meeting the requirements of every state scope of practice, and that they are doing what they needs to be done in order to ensure public safety and health. So our structure is similar to Jim's. We are an independent governmental organization. Our board consists of one delegate from each of the compact member states that are part of us, so each gets an equal vote. There's an executive board that helps administer and operate the organization. Myself is the only full-time staff person. And then we have our own bylaws, rules, policies, just like any other organization. Those are developed and amended and voted on by the commission itself. Again, so the commissioners from each one of those states, each one of our delegates are able to actually vote and determine what amendments need to be made. So it makes us flexible, makes us able to respond to current situations and make any improvements that we need to over time. We are focused on the enforcement of the compact provisions. Sure, as it be said again, we do not deal with the scope of practice of a state. So that scope of practice must be filed wherever the patient is located, whether it's under a license as it is today or over a compact privilege. That individual practicing in the state must follow that scope of practice. So our goal is not to, we do not want to and cannot get into the rules of a specific state. It is related to the rules of how to better operate and more efficiently run the compact itself and make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the compact language and enforcing those rules and regulations. And then the PTC issues compact privileges on behalf of each member state. So it is different in the sense that we don't have a multi-state license for ours. What we provided is a mechanism, an alternative pathway to licensure that someone who's eligible can get the privilege to practice in other states, but it's a la carte. They'll have to get a privilege in each place they want to practice. And that means that individual will have to pay the different fees depending on the state, which gives the states a lot more flexibility in what they want to charge per compact privilege. In our case, some states are charged $0 to get compact privileges. Other states are charging closer to what it costs to get a regular license. This helps those states that are potentially independent boards. They need to meet budgets, and they want to make sure that the compact isn't going to undercut any of their budgetary needs. And so that makes it more flexible for them to provide and determine whatever budget they want to have. Again, that's one of the reasons we set up our compact a little differently, where it's not a multi-state license. Someone still has to get a privilege. Additionally, that state's going to be aware of anybody who has the ability to practice in their state, and there'll be a specific associated compact privilege for every state that want to practice in. Just like when they get a license, there's associated specific license number for that state. That way you can directly show the authority that board has over the practice of the individuals in working in that state. So as I mentioned, as we do it, we really have a system where we are issuing that compact privilege on behalf of that state. So the commission is doing all the verification of eligibility. We're collecting all the fees on behalf of the state. What the state needs to do after they implement any of the requirements required by the compact law is that they then would have to send us on a weekly basis a list of all of their licensees, right? So we know who has a license in that state, who should be eligible, who's expired, share their disciplinary data. So we know that nobody that's had a disciplinary action the last 2 years would be eligible. Anybody with an encumbrance on a license would not be eligible to be part of the compact. And so we have a system that's set up that really verifies all that thing very quickly online, so someone can get a compact privilege in another state within a matter of minutes. So after they complete that state's jurisprudence exam, they can really go online, get online verification through our system, and really less than 10 minutes get issued a unique compact privilege number for a one state or a multitude of states that they want to get privileges in, and pay that all online on a very simple process. And so we try to really streamline the process for those folks, and again, increase that mobility and portability for individuals while still maintaining the public safety, and in fact, many cases, increasing public safety measures. So we like to think of this as a win-win-win situation for everyone. It's a win for the states themselves. It's a win for the individual PTs and PTAs, and it's really a win for the public. And I'll explain how in a couple minutes. For the jurisdictions, it preserves the current state-based licensure system. We do not replace it. It's really the same. Anybody can get a license today as they would otherwise in a compact member state. It's just an alternative pathway for them to get, for those who are eligible to get a privilege to practice in another state much faster. It requires full participation in one central database. This is the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy, ELDD, their licensure database. That right now is not happening without the compact. Only compact states are required to do that. So that's creating one central database where somebody gets a disciplinary action taken in one state, the other state's going to know about it if they're part of the compact. And that way, if they're a party member to that individual through a license or a compact privilege, or somebody's applied for a license there, they'll be automatically notified that there's a disciplinary action taken or there's an encumbrance on that individual. That, again, does not happen today without the compact. Some people may think that that's occurring, but that does not occur. Individual states really only are privy to the information that they have available to them or provided in an application by that individual. It does establish requiring federal criminal background checks for any initial licensure. That's not for people that are getting compact privileges, but it is for people that are getting initial licensure. That sets the floor across the board, across all the states that adopt the compact that currently didn't exist. It requires continuing competency for PTs and PTAs. Again, that's something that did not exist in all states before the compact. It allows investigatory information to be shared. This is something that's going to prevent state hopping, which again does not happen without the compact. Allows flexibility for that state to adjust what the financial impacts would be. As I said, they can set their own fees at whatever they'd like in order to get compact privileges in that state. And it just demonstrates responsiveness, right? I mean, there's calls to be able to reduce regulatory barriers out there. And we think that's important. We think be able to have better patient access is important. Be able to reduce that in some cases in some states that have a low reduction or low workforce numbers for physical therapists and physical therapist assistants. This is the way to answer and solve that problem, while not just eliminating all rules and saying just come work here. This increases the public protections while still reducing barriers. For the public, it increases continuity of care. As Jim talked about before, we saw a great example of this during the pandemic, when suddenly people that were traveling across the state borders that were going 10 miles from Iowa to Omaha, Nebraska, all of a sudden couldn't go into the office anymore. And then, so I can't get treated by the same person that was treating me yesterday. And so what do? Well, that individual may be licensed in Nebraska because that's where they come and treat patients. But suddenly they had to continue the continuity of care. They had to then find a way to get the ability to practice in the state of Iowa quickly. While the state of Iowa does their best and they are able to process licenses fairly quickly, they can't do it within 10 minutes. Nobody can do it within 10 minutes except for the compact. So that's why many people took advantage of cases like that, where they said, I need to be able to practice telehealth quickly. The telehealth laws allow it. I just need to have the ability to have a legal ability to practice and be authorized to practice in that state. So they used the compact and did it really within a day. They were able to both take that jurisprudence exam and be able to get compact privileges in that state. So it was a great ability. Again, during pandemic, it was an answer that nobody had initially put the question out there. When would that happen? What would happen if that case? Because nobody had thought about it. But when it did, compact was a great answer. Again, a lot of states moved to waivers. A lot of states allowed people just to practice in their state. But that was, again, more unregulated than being able to say that we've got people that have got compact privileges that are still under the regulatory requirements of both the board and the laws of the compact in order to practice there. It does increase the choice of physical therapy providers. Again, more people being able to access the state means more providers to choose from. It improves portability for military spouses. As Jim had mentioned, for the nursing compact, we're the same way. There's much more flexibility for somebody that's a active duty military or active duty military spouse to be able to get a compact privilege and get it quickly and more easily through the PT compact than it is just to get a regular license. And we've had many even our short time, we've had many military spouses and even active duty military take advantage of the compact and say how useful it is for them and how much easier it's made it for them in their lives. So a lot of states that have a large military presence have seen a real big value in putting a compact in place in order to improve the mobility for their service members. And then it looks as I mentioned before, telehealth, with things that people hadn't thought about before. It's the trend of the future. It's going to grow. And while we do not directly allow the practice of telehealth, if those states and those state laws provide for the ability to practice telehealth, as long as that person's licensed or has the authority to practice in the state, they can do it through the PT compact. So this again is allowing people to hold multiple licenses at a time for much cheaper and easier than they could before, which means telehealth is more of a reality than it ever was before. For PTs and PTAs themselves, it's faster. They can do it online. As I said, we do automatic eligibility in less than 10 minutes. It's more efficient. They don't have to send a bunch of paperwork in or fill out a bunch of applications and fax them in, or in some cases, in some states, or still even scan them in. It's in most part more inexpensive than getting a regular license. So that most states have set their fees so that the cost of a compact privilege costs less than get a regular license. It's easier. And so one of the key things of a car compact is that you do not have to maintain the continuing education requirements of all the different states you have compact privileges in. You just have to maintain that home state requirement. That means today, right now, if you hold multiple licenses in different states, you have to worry about when I'm going to have to renew in all those states these different licenses. B, what are they going to accept for all the continuing education requirements? And it can be lengthy, a lot of paperwork, a lot of time, and a lot of things to determine whether or not this counts for this state and this doesn't count for this state. And while it may not seem trivial, it does prevent people and makes people avoid wanting to actually get the ability to practice in other states and work in other states just for the mere amount of complication and time it takes. Not that it's not needed, not that there's not patience there, not that there's not an interest, but that the complication of it and the time and the money that it takes just is a deterrent. And the compact addresses all those while again continuing to maintain and improve public protections. I won't belabor these. These are the key aspects of our compacts, but again, just an alternative pathway. You can't use compact privileges to practice in your home state. They'll need to always have a license to be able to qualify in their home state. That's their primary residence state. It's tied to their expiration of their home state license. So again, they'll only have to worry about that one expiration date. And whenever that expires, they'll have to renew compact privileges instead of worrying about whether it's on their birthday, their anniversary, or every 3 years, or every 2 years. Again, this is just with all the 50 states, it really does require a lot of management to figure all that out. This makes it much easier for them. It's not a multi-state license, as I said. You'll need to have one for each state in our case. It's only available once that state's fully active, so that implementation period has to be done. For us, it usually takes 8 to 12 months. No special CE requirements. Again, just follow that home state. The fees vary widely by state because they can determine what they want to be, and the state can still require jurisprudence requirement. They can still require that person to take a law exam, something to determine that that's what the scope of practice is in that state, so that individual will be aware and have to make sure that they're aware, follow the requirements of wherever that patient's located. Again, it's not based on where their home state is, it's based on wherever that patient's located. They'll still have to follow it just like they do today with a regular license. And then it's really only for those best actors. So anybody with a disciplinary action for the last 2 years is not eligible, period. And anybody with any encumbrances, so they've got some limitation on a license for whatever reason, they are not eligible for compact privileges. And again, they would have to go back and either wait those 2 years to elapse or get that encumbrance removed in order to be eligible at all, plus meet the other requirements in terms of meeting jurisprudence of the state that they want to practice in, be able to have permanent residence in that home state that's active in the compact, and have a regular license that's valid and unencumbered in that home state. What that means for the states, I usually get this question, how difficult it is for the states to actually implement this. It is not very hard, really. What we're asking states to do is make sure that they've got continuing competency requirements. Again, that they'd have to make sure that PTs and PTAs, most states have that already. Criminal background checks have to be installed for initial licensure. Again, many states have that, but not all states. So that is something that they have to do during the implementation process, after they pass the bill and get that law in place. They need to fully participate in our compact database, which again, most states have their database already. We just work with them to get that information to us on a weekly basis, and require a national PT exam. And all states do that right now already. It's been in place for many years. And so they require the NPTE in order to get there. So that's something they're already doing. So in addition to that, there are a couple of minor things they need to do, pass rules, et cetera, in order to implement the requirements of the compact. But it really is not asking a state to do a lot more. And once they're fully implemented, there's hardly anything for a state to do really after that, because the commission in our case is doing the majority of the work for verification, collections of fees, and then being able to maintain the database of the individuals that have compact privileges. And our system is set up really to verify these main criteria. This is across the board, why all states have to pass the same compact law in order to make sure that they are just requiring these criteria for compact privileges. That's how we can set up a system that can do it in less than 10 minutes. So in our case, the people from a 30,000 foot level come to our website, ptcompact.org, look to make sure that they've got completed the state jurisprudence requirements, log into our system using an FSBBT ID and password that they should already have when they took their MPTE exam, or they can get it from us pretty easily. Put their information in there. We verify they have all the criteria that they need. They pay for it online like an e-commerce system, and they get their unique compact privilege numbers for each one of the states that they are interested in, and can come back whenever there's additional states they want to add. And they can do that all from our website at ptcompact.org. So the future, as Jim pointed out for him, there's lots of states that are part of the nursing compact. We've got 34 jurisdictions, technically, since DC is one of those 33 states in DC are part of our compact. The dark blue states there are the ones that are fully implemented right now and are actually issuing and accepting compact privileges. The light blue states are in the implementation process right now, and we're working hard with all those states to be ready as soon as possible. And then a couple states still have pending legislation that we're hopeful will pass later this year. But we are also looking to eventually get all jurisdictions as part of the PT Compact. We've only been doing it in earnest since 2016. We've come a long way, but we hope to get all states, and so have a nationwide PT Compact eventually, so everybody can move freely between states, be able to still be able to practice and serve patients across the country in a much easier fashion, still under the requirements and still regulated by those state boards. So that's all I've got, and then we can throw it back to Andrew and see if we got any questions.
Thanks, TJ, for that fantastic summary of the structure, benefits, and status of the PT Compact. So we have quite a bit of time, and we got 15 minutes. I did want to draw everyone's attention to something that Steve had said in the chat, which is, he says, it's worth sharing with this group. At the start of the pandemic, non-compact states were at a disadvantage and had to issue executive or emergency orders to open their state for needed clinicians from out of state. These orders were essential, and many continue today, but have been inconsistent and have caused much confusion for clinicians that were only responding to where they were most needed to care for patients. So obviously TJ touched on that a bit, but just wanted to reiterate that point, that states that were members of these healthcare licensure compacts were at a distinct advantage when the pandemic began. So to move into question and answer, as I said, you can raise your hand, or if you want to ask a question yourself, or you can put it in the chat, whatever you prefer. We did have one question from Senator Peacock. Glad to have you here. He says, do you think the nursing compact is allowing more nurses to be considered traveling nurses and thus creating a nurse shortage on paper? That's for Jim.
I think that's a good question. Certainly when students graduate from nursing programs because they think travel is glamorous, they all look forward to becoming travel nurses, but that's irrespective of the compact. And the reality is that they can't become travel nurses until they have several years of experience. I think there's a need for travel nurses, and I don't know if I can even put Steve on the spot. Steve Wen is with the largest staffing agency in the nation to also address that. But I think, the benefits of the compact are so great that, if we look at some particular area where we might say, is it causing this or is it causing that? I think the benefits outweigh anything negative, because just like a travel nurse might have to hold many licenses, so does the nurse who's caring for patients telephonically, does hold many licenses in many states. So I don't know that enough about travel nursing to tell you that nurses do that for their entire life. Certainly that's one segment of nurses, because by and large, most nurses are in direct patient care.
Thank you, Jim. It's Steve. Since I've been in the business for 30 years, I guess I better jump in on that question.
Thank you, Steve.
No worries. You're right. Travel nurses typically will travel 3 to 4 assignments, which are 13 weeks. Many times we only get them for 1, and then many times we get them for 5 or 6 years of their career. There are a few nurses that do it as a career their whole lives, but very few. I guess I don't see travel nurses at all contributing to the vacancies on paper. Where they're able to go is where the vacancies are, thus eliminating a lot of the concerns on vacancies with hospitals. So it's really the mobility of bringing nurses quickly to where they're needed to keep that balance, that ebb and flow of where the patient care is needed, running operationally efficiently, and not having, like what we're seeing in California right now, the demand is higher than it was at the peak of the pandemic. But we're seeing the emergency orders expire, and now hospitals are having to wait 3 to 4 months for nurses to come here. And it's creating even more strain on the health system than at the peak of the pandemic. So, I'm a little biased, but I certainly believe the mobility of the nurses and the Nurse Licensing Compact is essential in order to provide the kind of care our country is needing. Hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Jim. So this is a question for TJ. You talked a little bit about the difference between a compact privilege and multi-state license, but could you talk a little bit about what the rationale was for choosing to go with a compact privilege model instead of a multi-state license model?
Or happy to. And then I'll address the question that's on the in the chat. So the reason we did that, there was lots of discussion, and obviously there was some consideration of going with a multi-state license. I believe in the case of the physical therapy, what they were looking at was the opportunity to address the concern related to the states themselves, the state boards themselves, that were worried that, especially independent boards, that were worried that that an influx of compact privileges would somehow steal away revenue that they had already coming from endorsement applications from people that were trying to get licensed in their state from outside. And so they looked at the opportunity that if they had a multi-state license and there was one flat fee, again, in their thought process, then it would have to be split amongst several states. And so what they thought was it would be better to address it on a state-by-state basis, so that any state that joins the compact can then determine whatever fee they'd want to set it at. So as I said, like in Arizona, they decided the compact privileges should be free, and so that they set no compact privilege fee. In the case of Mississippi, they said, we are an independent board. We rely strongly on the money that's coming from our licensure, from endorsements from out of state. We were going to set that fee at $150, which is much closer to the regular licensure fee. Now, they can change those fees at any time that they want with 30 days notice, but those states are trying to, again, really address the ability to make sure they don't have a budgetary shortfall. And the reason, so one of the biggest reasons to make we did it this way is to make sure that those states have that flexibility versus one flat fee that would say, pay $1,000 for a multi-state license, and then that would be split amongst the states, was one of the concepts. The other reason I would say is that it allows that individual state, in our case, the state boards, really felt the need to know when that individual had the ability to practice in their state. Again, so versus having a multi-state license where they could practice in any one of the states that are part of the compact, then in this case, they still have to apply for a unique compact privilege in each one of the states they want to practice in. That state can then be notified as soon as that person gets a compact privilege that they now have the ability to practice in their state. They may not practice tomorrow, or within the next few days, but they know that that individual would still be in their system to be able to say, John Smith has the ability now to practice in our state. He may only have the ability to practice in that state, in his home state, and none of the other compact member states. And they wanted to be able to make that distinction. The other, as it was asked in the chat here, was it related to unions? In our case, it was not at all. We really don't have any opposition from any unions. Really, there's no opposition in general, a general opposition against the PT compact. Our associations, the PT associations out there on the state level, are very supportive. In fact, we rely mainly on them to introduce our legislation, find sponsors, and get that passed. Most PTs and PTAs, in fact, all the PTs and PTAs I've ever spoken with, which is a lot, but admittedly not everyone, have been very supportive of the compact. They are very interested in being able to increase their mobility and access, to other states, and reduce the regulatory barriers. And so we have a large support amongst physical therapists out there, and really no union opposition in our case.
Thanks, TJ. On a bit of a related note, we had a question in the chat asking, directed to Jim, why are some states reluctant to join despite the benefits that you laid out in your presentation?
So there are not states that are reluctant. As I mentioned earlier, when you look at the nurses in a state, they all want the state to join. But there are a few states where there's a barrier to successfully enacting the compact. And the barrier tends to be a nurse union in opposition. Now, I want to qualify that because when we have surveyed nurse unions, 2 out of 3 of their rank and file members want the state to join the compact. It is the union leader that is the influential person who can get the legislature to not support the compact. So no, I would not say states don't want. Every state wants to join the compact. It's just the barriers that exist in probably 6 to 8 states.
Makes sense. Thanks, Jim. While you're here, another question was about the cost of a multi-state license and how that compares to typical costs for a single state license.
Well, one of the things with the nursing licenses is the fees are decided by the state. So the Compact Commission doesn't decide on a fee, but obviously to obtain one license, states charge anywhere from, I would say, as low as $50 to as high as $250. So I think the average is about $150. So if you needed multiple licenses, you can just kind of add that up and it adds up very quickly. Whereas one multi-state license might only cost you 100 or 150, as opposed to multiply that times 10 or 20 or however many you may need.
Got it. And then, another question for Jim. TJ kind of covered this in his presentation for PT, but could you go into a little bit more detail on the specific steps required for state implementation of the NLC?
Sure. Largely, I think the most of the amount of time it takes to implement is on the IT side, meaning the changes that need to be made to the licensure database system at the Board of Nursing. That can take a good 6 months. It's a process because you may have to get RFPs. It needs to be put in someone's priority list of work to do. And it's joint work. There's a vendor involved. There's the IT staff at the state level that are involved. But then you're also uploading all of this licensure data into the national database, which is called Nurses. And that's an additional process to be able to make sure that it's formatted appropriately. So the IT process is a big part of implementation, but hand in hand with that is the updating of forms at the Board of Nursing applications, as well as updating the Board of Nursing website. The other thing that happens during implementation is the education of stakeholders throughout the state so that hospitals and nurses understand how the compact works before it goes live.
So one other question that I got in privately in the chat was about a sort of trending issue in the States, which is universal recognition or universal reciprocity, which is essentially a law that directs all state licensure boards and or agencies to issue a license for someone who holds a license from another state. And the difference between that and an interstate compact. And I can address that one. So essentially, these two policies can coexist. It's basically a universal reciprocity law seeks to account for all professions, whereas a compact, of course, only accounts for one profession. Excuse me, I'm getting a message here. Sorry. The universal reciprocity obviously does not account for practitioners that are trying to leave the state. So they only account for practitioners coming into the state, which is a major difference. And they don't contain the compact commission data system. So we don't get the same public protection capabilities that come with a compact. So that's kind of the main difference. And as long as a universal reciprocity law contains an exemption for compacts, saying that a license issued by universal reciprocity does not confer eligibility for a compact, then these can totally coexist. With that said, are there any more questions? I don't see any more in the chat. If anybody else has anything, please raise your hand. I'll let that marinate for just a moment.
Andrew, there was one more question for Jim about
Okay. Oh yes,
union leverage.
Sorry. Yeah, we had another follow-up question about the kind of union issue. Jim, could you address? Someone had mentioned the compact impacting union leverage. What do you think about that?
Well, I would have to tell you that there are compact states that have nurse unions, and there are those with nurse unions that haven't joined the compact yet. But in reality, if we're talking about a union that strikes at a hospital, when there is a strike at a facility, the hospital has to get replacement nurses for all of the nurses that walked out. That's just the reality. And that happens whether you are a compact state or a non-compact state. Now, we haven't seen any strikes in compact states, but that's not because there are not unions in them. But the reality of there being replacement nurses is just something that happens because there are patients that need to be cared for, whether you're a compact state or not. So when that happens, if you think too, because the same scenario happens in schools, Chicago, where I'm located, we happen to have teacher strikes where the teachers walk out, and of course the schools have to close down. But in a hospital, it's not that easy. We need replacement nurses to care for, and that kind of goes against the grain of what the union is trying to do. The union is bargaining with the hospital to come to some negotiation to get, each party is trying to get what they want. And obviously it's the union, why would they want to make it easier on the hospital for nurses to come into the state during the strike? But my understanding is, in reality, if there's a strike in a state, it's to everyone's advantage to get nurses from in-state to come and assist at that hospital during the strike before you start to look out of state, because your cost exponentially increases if you have to fly nurses in. So I think there's a few sides to that story. And I just don't know, because you hear different claims from different unions. They're not all singing out of the same hymnal.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's clearly a lot of complicated factors at work here, but we appreciate that explanation. So we're unfortunately just about out of time. I don't want to keep anyone much longer than we promised. If anyone had a question that they did not get to ask, I'll put my email in the chat, abates@csg.org. That's abates@csg.org. On behalf of CSG, the NLC, and PT Compact, I want to thank everyone for attending today. We hope you found this session engaging and informative, and we also hope to see you at our next installment, which is scheduled for September 1st, and we'll cover the Interstate Compacts for psychology and emergency management personnel. I would note that we are trying to target our invitations toward officials from states that have not enacted these compacts, so we don't want to waste anyone's time. But if you are from a state that has enacted the psychology or EMS compact and would still like to attend, please just send me an email and I can add you to the invite list. Thanks, Jim and TJ, so much for joining us, and we really appreciate your all's efforts, and we love working with you guys. And with that, I wish everyone a pleasant afternoon, and thanks for attending. Take care and be well.